Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is a special Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading and by saving the environment. Thank you so much. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Neil Kitching. He'll be here to celebrate carbon choices. Before we invite Neil into the studio, we want to invite you to join the Reading with Your Kids podcast at two amazing live in-person events happening in August and September. On August 28th, we will be returning to the Connect Fest Family Music Festival. It's happening at the Cape Cod Fairgrounds in Falmouth, Massachusetts. I've been a part of this event for many, many years. It's a fantastic time. It's free. You do need tickets because they do have a capacity, but they're really easy to get and they're free. All you need to do is to go to fuseconcerts.org. That's happening on August 28th. And on September 18th, we will be part of the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. This is going to be the first time that I'm going to be participating in this event, and I am so psyched. It looks like so much fun. We're going to have a great Reading with Your Kids tent at both events. We'll be giving away books, doing a little bit of magic, and maybe getting some of you to be on the podcast. Check it out at the Connect Fest, August 28th on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race in Lowell, Massachusetts on September 18th. We'd love to see you there. Joining us right now from Dunblane and Scotland and United Kingdom, our guest is the author of Carbon Choices. He's here to tell us a little bit about some information we need to know about climate change and how we can use that information to talk to our kids about climate change and get them invested and involved. Please welcome to the show, Neil Kitching. Neil, welcome. How are you?
I'm very good, and thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited to have you on. Our Protecting the Planet with Your Kids series has been all about helping parents understand what it is, what climate change is, and why it's important, and how we can talk to our kids. It seems like there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of times it just appears to be two sides fighting about it. You know, it's one side with, we got to climate change, the world's going to end. And the other side is saying, you guys are crazy. It's all made up. It's in your head. And it's, what's the reality?
Gosh, so yes, there's so much misinformation out there. And if you hear about climate change from the newspapers or from the media, or even worse in social media, then you're going to get very biased, one-sided view of everything. So really that's what I try to do in my book, is to pull together everything you need to know about climate change and bring it together in an easy-to-read style. Really as an introduction to climate change, particularly for all the parents out there who perhaps weren't taught about climate change in any detail at school or at college.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. What's the first thing that we should know about climate change?
Well, it's real. It's definitely happening. All scientists agree on that. And also it's serious. I don't want to understate that. It is something we need to be concerned about. It's something that's going to affect our society. It's going to affect our economy. It's going to affect our children. So, yes, I mean, we do need to know about it and we need to act on it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I hear in the endless arguments that we hear online is that, yes, climate change is happening, but it's natural. Climate change always happens. It's, we had the ice age and then this and so there's nothing we can do about it. It's not our fault.
Well, of course, climate change has always happened, but generally very slowly. humans are interfering with these natural processes and accelerating climate change. And the planet's already at a relatively warm level. It's been much colder in the past during ice ages. So we're actually starting off from a warm start and then making that even hotter. So yes, perhaps climate change wouldn't have been so bad if we'd been doing it during the middle of the last ice age, but today it's not good news.
Yeah. So how do we tell kids this to help them know that the climate change is real and that it's something that we need to be aware of without terrifying them?
Yes, it's a difficult one, but it's just something we need to talk to our children about. It's not something to sweep under the carpet and ignore. And, children are often the first to want to act and to want to do things. So it's nothing to be scared about to talk to children about climate change. Mm-hmm. Be honest with them. Come up with solutions. Climate change is something we can tackle. It's just as a society, we haven't chosen to tackle it as yet.
Well, obviously a family living in Dunblane or in Reedville here in Boston, we can't necessarily go and change our society, but there are different choices that we can make in our own lives. What are some of those choices that we can make on a family level that could help the situation?
Yes, you're right. There's things that government needs to do. There's things that businesses need to do. And there's also things that we as individuals can do. So at an individual level, it's, first thing is, where do you choose to live? How big is your house? How many people do you share your house with? How many bedrooms, bathrooms do you have? Is your house bigger than what you need? So I'd say that was a starting point to choose where you live. And if you live in the outskirts in a car-dependent suburb, then you're going to be driving out everywhere. Whereas, if you live at other places, you might be able to use public transport, cycle or walk. And I think for our children, it's a great thing if they can walk or cycle to school. So there's all sorts of benefits from thinking about where you live, how you live, as a starting point. And that's before you move on to things like your transport options, whether you have a car, 2 cars, an electric car, whether you cycle. And then, of course, there's your diets, which is a surprisingly large proportion of your climate impact. Varies depending on what you choose to eat.
Yeah, we've covered that a little bit with one of our past guests, Aaron Twomley. Can you talk a little bit more about diet and what kind of choices we can make when it comes to diet that can have a positive impact on our environment?
Well, I'm sure you've heard this before, but beef and mutton and dairy products from milk have a disproportionate impact on climate change. And that's because cows and sheep are ruminants and they burp out methane. And that's just part of their natural biology. So that's a huge issue, and it's one, again, that we need to talk about. I'm not proposing in my book that everybody becomes a vegetarian or vegan overnight, but I certainly think we should be thinking about our diets and moving towards more plant-based diets. Mm-hmm. And that would be cheaper, it would be healthier, it would be better for the planet. There's lots of reasons for that. Yes.
Yeah. I think the statistic I heard was there are 2 billion cows or some amazing number like that, all creating methane that's affecting the why is my brain freezing? Affecting the atmosphere.
That sounds about right, yes.
Yeah.
But there's also lots of sheep out there as well.
Yeah, I never thought sheep, it doesn't tend to be a big part of our diet here in the States, so I hadn't realized that sheep are also contributing to the problem.
Yeah, so where I live, there's more sheep than cattle. And I guess in countries like Australia and New Zealand, it's probably very similar.
Yeah. How did you get involved? How did this become such a passionate issue for you?
I was kind of brought up in the countryside. I always loved nature and being outdoors, and I always loved snow. I'd studied geography at university and actually learnt about climate change at university 30 years ago. And I then spent the next 20 years wondering why society wasn't dealing with something that I knew was coming. I trained as an accountant, worked as an accountant in business, and again, nobody was talking about climate change. It's just completely ignored. So I was very frustrated. I then had a midlife career change into sustainable development policy. So it was quite a sudden career change, and then just read and learnt more and more on this topic. Yeah. And now work as an energy and water specialist, helping companies. I thought, gosh, I know all this stuff. Let's write it down. Let's get it on paper and see if I can influence in my own small way.
Yeah. So we talked about making the choice of where we live and our diet. Are there other things that especially families with young kids can do, active things that can get them making a difference, but also just a fun way to come together and to talk about the issue of climate change and grow closer together as they're protecting the planet?
Yes, I think children need to be brought up with nature. And of course, for many of us who live in cities, that's become increasingly difficult. So with a young family, take them out to nature, show them about nature and let them learn and play outdoors. I don't know if you have this in the States, but we have a concept called forest schools. It's something that came from Scandinavia. And it usually starts with nursery school, but can include primary school. And that's schools which, are usually in woodlands. The children are outdoors 90% of the time rather than the indoors 90% of the time. But it's more than that. It's more of an attitude. The forest schools allow children to play unsupervised or with less supervision, and it helps enhance their social, emotional, physical development. And children seem to develop more self-esteem when they're left alone rather than the supervised play that most nurseries these days seem to have. So I think that's, a great way, a great start to life. And children who experience that, they may get less formal education in the first couple of years, but they very quickly catch up because they're more mature. So, I think that's something to promote.
That's interesting, and it is true. A lot of families are so focused, and it never made sense to me, but I heard stories about, parents getting their kids on waiting lists to make sure that they're in the right preschool from the minute they're conceived. That, we got to get my kid into this preschool and into that kindergarten and get them into all the different structured activities, and they have to learn how to play violin by the time they're 5 or 6 years old. And the reality is, what they really need to find out about is themselves and who they are and where they're living, and learn to love themselves and learn to love this beautiful planet that we're on.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. There's a statistic in my book that nearly 90% of children in the United Kingdom, these are children aged between 7 and 10, that are accompanied by adults walking or driving to school. And about half of them are actually being driven in private cars to school. I'm sure it's very similar in the States, but if you go to Copenhagen or some of the Scandinavian countries, 90% of children are walking to school, often unaccompanied. So they're going to their local schools, whereas there's an increasing culture here of children being driven across the city to some sort of best school on the other side of the city. But you lose out so much in terms of local community, that's really not what we should be wanting for our children.
Yeah, you definitely see here, very rarely we see kids walking to school unaccompanied. There have been stories here in the States where parents have been arrested because they've allowed their 7 or 8 year old to walk to school unaccompanied, which is ridiculous to me. But here most kids are on the big old smog belching yellow buses, or as you said, they're being driven in private cars. Why do you think it is? And again, you said you thought about this. Why do you think it is that our society, we've known about this, or at least a certain segment of the society has known for a long time that climate change is an issue, that our climate has been changing, that we've been contributing to it, but we haven't taken action? You mentioned 20 years. It's probably been going on longer than that.
I don't know. If there was an easy answer, I guess we would have dealt with it.
Yeah.
But to me, it should start with the way our taxes are set, the way our subsidies are set. So these taxes and subsidies should be there to help society. And yet, the taxes are in the wrong place and fossil fuels are still subsidized. That's kind of why I say it's not so much of a difficult problem to solve. It just requires government, politicians, society to actually do it. But yeah, why? Well, obviously, initially, there was a huge campaign to discredit scientists, led by the fossil fuel lobby, in the same way that the smoking lobby did the same against the science for the harm from smoking. So there's powerful vested interests, and the politicians are often, involved in that. So gradually things have changed, but, now the argument has moved on. People, certainly in the United Kingdom, aren't saying that climate change isn't real, but there's still people trying to slow down changes and say, oh yes, we will be net zero by 2050, and, putting targets out far beyond reach. So yeah, there's still big delaying tactics. So yeah, there's a whole issue still to be solved. We're not there yet.
Yeah. And I think that's something that parents can talk to their kids about too, is, we encourage families here on the podcast to help their kids become media literate, to help them understand that all the media that they are consuming has been created by someone who wants them to buy something, to think a certain way, to do something. And this is, I think it's an important conversation to have with kids when they're seeing all these conflicting messages coming from media, from social media, to teach our kids to sit down and really discern where this message is coming from and why it might be being put out there. What was the most surprising thing as you were writing Carbon Choices? What was the most surprising thing that you discovered as you were writing the book?
I hadn't realized how big an impact cattle had. I was aware of the issue, but yes, that became apparent. But we've already talked about that. I suppose the other issue is it's rich countries and rich people, some of whom are in the same countries, but rich people could live in any country around the world, who are causing the vast majority of carbon emissions. It seems to be quite difficult when you're wealthy not to. It's not impossible, of course, but wealthier people tend to consume more. So it's this consumption of stuff, as I call it. So much stuff that you buy that might be in the bin, thrown out 24 hours later. And everything that's manufactured has come from raw materials that's been mined, and there's been energy involved in that, and energy involved in shipping it, energy involved in manufacturing it, and then processing it, and then using it. So it's this just massive consumption. People worry about population growth, they worry about all sorts of other issues, but it's just a massive increase in consumption, which started in countries like the United States and Europe, but now countries like China are catching up remarkably fast. Their rates of consumption are soaring. They manufacture more cement and concrete than anywhere else in the world. So I'm not saying we need to stop consuming. What I'm saying is we need to consume wisely. So think about what you buy. Try and buy things with long product guarantees. So try and buy a car with a 7-year guarantee rather than a car you might replace after 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Same with mobile phones, although that seems to be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it's one of the things I suggest is a simple rule that all of these electronic products should come with a 5-year guarantee. That would make a massive difference.
Yeah.
And it would benefit consumers. Manufacturers would provide better quality products, and they'd be longer lasting and better for us.
Yeah. That's, I think, a really important conversation for parents to have with their kids. Just this idea of being thoughtful, being mindful when we're making the choice of in a store. Do we need this? Do we want it? Is it good for the environment if we have it? Are we going to use it? Or, as you said, is this something that we're going to bring home and then we're going to throw away in a day or two, or it's going to sit in a closet for years and then get thrown away?
Yes, a very simple example here. Our government introduced a plastic bag tax for single-use plastic bags. There's only 5 pence per bag, which is tiny. You'd hardly notice it. Mm-hmm. And yet the consumption of single-use plastic bags fell by 90% overnight. And, everybody benefits as a result of that.
Yeah. This is just some great information that we can talk with our kids. In your writing the book, in your research, have you discovered? You chose to name your book "Carbon Choices." Have you discovered any neat or fascinating ideas that folks are coming up with to capture some of the carbon that's being put out?
There's a chapter in the book on carbon offsetting. So that's the idea of magically getting rid of your carbon emissions, perhaps through planting trees, or you're restoring wildlife reserves and nature. But there are experiments going on with proper carbon capture and storage. And when I say proper, to me, it's burying it deep underground, kind of back where it came from. So coal and oil and gas came from deep underground. Can we get the carbon dioxide back under there? And I think we could do it, but it's going to cost us £200. What's that? $300 per tonne. Whereas you can plant trees for £10 per tonne. So everybody's going for the cheap option. I'm all for planting trees, but if that forest burns down in 20 years' time, then you haven't actually captured any carbon at all in the long term. So whilst I'm all in favour of restoring nature and planting trees, we need to do more than that. We do need to bury this underground. Yeah.
Fascinating. So much to talk to about, and so much great information in your book that could really lead to great conversations with our kids. You were mentioning that Carbon Choice is certainly a book that high school kids can read. I think it's a book that families can sit down, parents can gain a lot of knowledge and have some really important conversations with their kids around this issue. Neil, where can people go to find out more about you and find out more about Carbon Choices?
So I have a website. It's www.carbonchoices.uk. So there's lots of information on there. There's a summary of the book. There's testimonials. There's my blog and some photographs. If they want to buy the book, even better. So it's available worldwide on Amazon and on Kindle. So if you just search for Carbon Choices.
Well, we've had a great time speaking with the author of Carbon Choices, Neil Kitching. Neil, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. That was fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Jessica Spear. She'll be here to celebrate BFF or NRF, Girls Guide to Friendship. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to help you tell the world all about your book. We have a number of ways we can do it. Of course, we would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it doesn't cost any money, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. You can also take part in our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. If our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. And with that status comes a whole lot of really great promotional tools that can help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. And we also have some great ways for parents to actually meet your book in person. I mentioned at the top of the show we're going to be part of 2 great live events coming up. Connect Fest on Cape Cod and the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. We will have a booth at both of those events, and we will be exhibiting books at those booths, letting parents see your books up close and personal. You can find out more about all of these opportunities by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, clicking on the author's click here button at the top of the page, and scroll on down to whatever category you're interested in. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, Neil Kitching. Please be sure to check out Carbon Choices. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Helen Frazier, Justina Thompson. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.